My golden brother stole my fiancée and built his life on my pain. So I destroyed his marriage and left him with nothing. My name is Dan, I'm 27, and honestly, I could start this story with, you know how every family has that perfect older brother that parents practically worship and hold up as a shining example? Well, that's exactly who I have. Alex, 30 years old, successful, charming, the quintessential golden boy, as everyone calls him. Our entire family has always looked at him with this awestruck reverence, as if he were some kind of rock star. Meanwhile, I was the one constantly stuck in the shadows, even if the concert was my life. And you know what? I'd almost come to terms with it. Almost. But then I met Emmy, and everything felt easier. She was the first person to truly see me, not the me that everyone assumed based on my last name and family reputation. Emmy was my armor. We could talk about everything, dream about our future, and I knew she was my support system. With her, I could be whoever I wanted, even a failure, and still feel accepted. She made me feel like I mattered. I was sure I'd found my happiness. Or at least, I thought I had until my golden brother decided it was time to claim another trophy, my fiancée. At first, it seemed like just minor things. You know, those innocent coincidences. Suddenly, Emmy was mentioning him more often, supposedly running into him here and there. Oh, I just ran into Alex at a cafe. Can you believe he's working in the same building where I have meetings? I didn't want to seem paranoid, but when random encounters happen as often as the bus schedule, it stops feeling so innocent, doesn't it? There's that gut feeling, and even though there wasn't hard evidence, I could feel it gnawing at me. I asked her directly, but she brushed it off with, Dan, it's just your jealousy talking. Sure, that explains everything. Yeah, it might have been jealousy, but I wasn't the one who'd left myself in this mess. Then one night, I come home to a picture-perfect scene. Emmy and Alex, sitting close together, the way they looked at each other, like there was some invisible bond between them that couldn't be broken. That was enough. I knew right then that things had passed the point of no return. He was laughing. She was smiling. I just stood there, feeling like my heart had been ripped out and tossed in the trash. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the live demolition of my life, and I was the one standing on the sidelines. A few weeks later, Alex decides to officially let me know. He calls me with a smugness, as if he's just won the lottery, and says, Amy and I are together now. Just like that, as if I should hand him a medal for it. Not a hint of remorse, just pure arrogance. And you know what? I had nothing left to say. I stood there listening, realizing he wouldn't stop until he took everything. I felt a cold rage, something so overpowering that it replaced the pain, leaving me with a single, clear desire for revenge. I swore he'd regret his choice. Once Alex and Emmy announced they were a couple, they started acting like they'd won the Olympics. Only this time the gold medal was my life. Their photos, plastered with those blissful smiles, took over social media. Yeah, I found myself staring at those posts, seeing how in love they looked, like someone had scrubbed away every last bit of decency and replaced it with pride and audacity. It wasn't just that they were together. They seemed to revel in the fact that every time I opened my phone, I was slapped in the face. To them, it was a show, a power play. To me, it was the start of something much bigger. They wanted an epic battle. Well, they'd get one. The bitterness kept building in me. But anger, you see, has a way of sharpening your focus. I decided to dig into Alex's perfect life, to find out what his ideal business was really built on. And that's when things got interesting. Behind his sparkling smile and pricey suits lay something darker than night. My brother, it turned out, was filthier than his slicked-back hair. He'd built his success on deceit, scamming clients, using shady schemes to prop up his fraud. His perfect business was an illusion, and his clients had no idea they were feeding a phony. But this time, I had evidence. I gathered call logs, emails, financial records. I had an entire file on my brother that weighed like a brick and was as devastating as a meteor. Now I had a plan, and all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to bring him down. Because, as they say, Revenge is a dish best served when it's least expected. The moment came at a family dinner. My parents decided to bring everyone together, and of course, Alex and Emmy were there, glowing like newlyweds. Normally, I'd have skipped the event, but this dinner was the perfect stage, and I planned to be the star. In the middle of the evening, when no one suspected a thing, I stood up with a radiant smile and started revealing the truth about my dear brother. You all think we have the best of the best here, but who would have guessed that behind the facade is a fraud? My parents looked at me, baffled, and Alex, naturally, turned pale as a ghost. He tried to keep his cool, clenching his lips and rolling his eyes, but he was clearly starting to sweat. I dropped the facts, each one landing like a hammer on his pride. I exposed his scams, how he'd been tricking clients and building his business on lies. My parents sat in shock, and the room filled with a tense silence, like the calm before a storm. Dad looked at him as if seeing a stranger, while Mom's face went from confusion to outright disappointment. Alex tried to defend himself, but his words were empty. His mask was cracking, and with it, his perfect image was crumbling. Alex was furious. So much so that it was almost comical. He started to look like one of those action movie villains whose head seems ready to explode. Once he realized that his golden boy mask was shattered, he made a desperate attempt to silence me. He threatened, saying if I didn't stop digging into his life, I'd pay for it. Seriously? That's all he's got? Sure, Alex, because I'm so easy to intimidate. The harder he pushed, the more I enjoyed his panic. I watched his world fall apart piece by piece as fear and desperation flickered in his eyes. He knew his golden shine was fading, and I stood there, relishing the show like it was the best movie I'd ever seen. My parents started seeing him in a different light, too. For them, it was like meeting a stranger, and you know what? They didn't like this new Alex. They finally began to see him the way everyone he'd betrayed saw him, and I wasn't the least bit opposed to it. My mission had only just begun, and since he took everything from me, I'd strip away what he valued most, his reputation. The next move? I let rumors of his dirty deeds spread, making sure everyone who cared enough picked up on them. His business partners began to view him like expired shellfish. Big contracts? Gone. His brilliant reputation? Down the drain. One by one, Alex's friends, who once admired his success, started to distance themselves. He'd been surrounded by people who stood with him as long as he had the sparkle and the fame. But as soon as it all started crumbling, they vanished faster than free pizza at a college dorm. And Emmy? That was the sweetest part. At first, she tried to support him, saying, Alex, this is all just a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings don't turn your life to rubble, right? She started to see that her perfect man was just a neatly packaged lie. One day, she even reached out to me. Dan, let's just put this behind us. It's not what you think. I just laughed. No, Emmy, it's even more than I thought. Revenge is a process, and I was only halfway through. I kept unearthing and revealing everything that could ruin whatever trust was left between them. Alex had a few more skeletons in his closet, secrets he'd hidden from everyone. And when I brought them out, their perfect relationship turned into a farce. His lies now spread like weeds, taking over every corner of their lives. Emmy could no longer close her eyes to the reality of who this golden Alex really was. What she'd once seen as a bright light in her life had turned into a blinding chaos. His life was now a tragic comedy, starring him as the desperate liar. At that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing. Finally, the day came when Alex, the so-called golden boy, lost everything. His business crumbled like a house of cards. One contract after another fell through, taking his confidence with it. All that remained were mountains of debt, while his friends scattered, as if he'd suddenly become contagious. And there he was, worn down and desperate, coming to me, begging for this madness to end. Standing before me was a completely different Alex, no longer the arrogant king, but a pitiful, defeated man who had finally realized his luck had run out. He looked like a character from a movie who, after losing it all, approaches the main villain to beg for mercy. Only this time, he was the one playing the villain, and I had no sympathy left for him. Yes, he was once my brother, but standing before me now was not a brother. It was the result of his own choices. He wanted to play big. Well, here was the cost. Emmy, of course, had left him. Once she saw that her perfect knight was made of cardboard instead of gold, everything fell into place. But as for trying to win her back, ha! I was no longer naive enough to jump back into that relationship. It was enough for me that she'd left, while Alex was left alone, sitting in the ruins of his success, like at the bottom of a pit he'd dug himself. The last time I saw him was the day he moved out of his house. He packed his belongings into a rental car, having sold everything he could to try to claw his way out of debt. It seemed his entire being screamed, "I lost." I just stood there, saying nothing. At one point, he looked at me as if he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. And rightly so. What more was there to say? Everything had already been said through our actions. As he finally drove off, the air felt thick with a sense of finality. I knew his golden life was officially over,